My dearest colleagues and guests, I would like to open it with thank you to Meir and the team of this institute for hosting this conference. And I'm very grateful for your hospitality. I think the partnership in this discussion will allow us to overview this important issue on the agenda from different points of view, sometimes completing, sometimes completely opposed to each other, in order to circle this topic from all the aspects, to pinpoint risks and to build recommendations for various entities. As the wise men of Israel said, the only way to sharpen the knife is with another knife. I saw an importance with the message that as a result of this cooperation, message of removing walls and ability to have a conversation regardless different points of view. We don't have to agree. We probably won't be able to reach an agreement on all the issues. But it's not just a prevention of a joint conversation, but the other way around. Because of that, we require such a conversation that will channel this dispute into the relative pragmatic topics. We have a number of researchers in both of the institutions that have no doubt that their outcomes are impacted by this cross-pollination, because we are exposed to different approaches and are required to handle various discussions and points of view. That's very true when it comes to the research institutions, and I don't want my positions to be accepted just because my competitors are weaker. I do think that this is the spirit that is breathing in the corridors of other institutions as well. Distinguished guests. On 7th of October, there was an earthquake in Israel, and the shock and the horror of this monstrous attack, we added the sense of humiliation of national honor that has been trampled, and the shock by the failure of the critical systems that we did develop while remembering the surprises of Yom Kippur War, while celebrating 50 years. The reality is still emerging in the northern border versus Iran and other of its proxies, in Gaza, on the political arena and the internal playground. The hostages still yet to return, and I would like to join in my prayers to their quick return. And the combat continues, and the list of fallen soldiers is long. The evacuated population is still evacuated. The Israeli society moves from the hell of the southern district to the battlefield of Gaza. It's still losing and trying to process what actually happened. The war undermined certain assumptions and historical paradigms, and arose among many of us thoughts about the meaning of the state, and brought us back to the very existential foundations as a nation and as a society. The recognition, based on which we wanted to liberate ourselves, but we are still in existential battle. Israel, after the war, will never return to be the way it was before. It will be wounded, scarred, in pain, but more connected to the very founding values of it, aware of the fragility of its existence, more sober, more moderate, and more cautious in the policies of security, foreign relations, and one would hope in the internal battles that exist in our society. And from here, I would like to access the topic of our conversation. Normalizations with the Saudis is a very important purpose of Israel, where we should invest a lot of effort, though not at any cost. From the Washington perspective, Gaza is not just a threat. The war in Gaza is also an opportunity for them. This is, as many speakers said, this is the chance of changing the global order to create the new Middle East, the center on which the normalization of a regional scope, and to pave the two-state solution vision. I assume that in the White House they would have happy to declare, yeah, we prevented the regional war, and secondly, we allowed the innovation of the global trade through the Red Sea. Thirdly, we switched the Middle East to the American camp. We converted them. We created the local alliance against Iran. 5, we brought to the end of the Arabic and Palestinian conflict. We added and took out the power from Gaza and Hamasi hands, and we opened the route to Palestinian state. That can be quite an achievement for Biden administration that will impact not just the foreign affairs, but also the global economy and the American one as well. How should it happen? Those of you who are not as knowledgeable as the representatives of the think tanks, Israel will have to agree to end the war and to accept Hamas requirements to release the terrorists, go back to 67, and to receive the hostages in return. Israel will have to accept that the Palestinian Authority, under different brands, will receive responsibility for the civil management of the Strip, and this is how they will be able to say, okay, main topics of war were obtained. We returned the hostages and we removed Hamas from power. This end of war in Gaza will end the warfare in the north and in the Red Sea. In addition, Israel will forced to give its consent to the route that in the end will lead to the Palestinian state, and if not, any other stipulations of the Saudis for normalization with Israel. Israel will have to agree for concessions on the nuclear civilian reactors and the defense alliance between both of the countries. In addition, will receive the alliance with the United States as well in different formulations. From the first point of view, it seems perfect. From one hand, with few uncomplicated steps, we can rearrange this Rubik cube. But from the other hand, it's indeed a real visionary solution that will raise us from this gas and swamp and bring us to the summits of the optimism and new spirit that the nation is so thirsty for. And if you wish, it has also a certain victory over the axis of evil and Hamas. Those that wanted to stop normalization will receive it regardless. From the other hand, when you delve into details, you understand that the picture is much more complicated. The price that Israel will be required to pay will position us under a question mark and the worthiness of this project in our eyes, especially at this particular time. The first price we'll have to pay is the end of war in Gaza without the decisive victory over Hamas. I think one cannot create a new order without bringing the collapse of Hamas and destroying its military capacities. You cannot actually wipe under the carpet this global integration, hundreds of kilometers of Hamas munition and the military force that remain in the field. The damage we caused Hamas up to now is painful, but it's reversible. The ability of Hamas to rehabilitate itself and its deep hold upon the population and the government structures and the support they will receive from abroad will allow them to rehabilitate themselves quickly. After the massacre of 7th of October, the results of Gaza war is an existential matter for Israel. The Israeli deterrence and the image of our security strength are currently a test, and they have a decisive impact upon our political status in the region. Enemies, friends, and those who are hesitant which side to choose in the international system are looking at the occurrences in Gaza. The results of war will dictate significantly the way they see and perceive us. Israel signed the Abraham Accords. Out of its power, the move with Saudis should not be perceived as a lack of victory and weakness. In order for us to be able to return and to settle down in the Western Negev, we must remove the threat. One of the hostages that were returned from Gaza in the deal with Hamas told in the media interviews that in conversations towards her release, the capturers offered her not to come back to Israel in one of the settlements of the Otef. So you shouldn't go back there, because we'll do that. We'll do that again and again and again. Our geographic proximity to the enemy doesn't allow us to take any risk. With all due respect to our friends overseas, this is not the war in Iraq or in Afghanistan, thousands of miles from their territory, and sometimes some compare it to the war in Gaza. Secondly, putting the civil governance of Gaza in hands of the Palestinian Authority or any other regime that is not Hamas. The truth should be said. There are no good options of day after in Gaza. If they would have been in existence, they would have implemented one of the many chances during the years of conflict. Nevertheless, we should not be the experts in reconnaissance that in current relationships of power, there is no one entity will be replacing Hamas in the civil management of the Strip without Hamas's consent. Whether it's the Palestinian Authority, the Klan camp, or technocratic government or local heads of the clans. Hamas will be accepting such a model only if they don't have a chance, or if they will be shaping this model as their puppet government that they will be using in order to cover their military empowerment. There was a reason that the leaders of Hamas wanted to voice different declarations, will be willing to support the national Palestinian consent government in Gaza and the West Bank if we will be part of it. We don't have to be part of it. They know that we'll be able to be the puppeteer behind the curtains and pull the strings of them, puppets of this government. In such a case, Israel will pay a double price. The Hamas will be empowering itself under the coverage of the new government, but it will be hard for the Israel to operate against this government because of the national community, while failing to establish a governmental alternative to Hamas. In different circles, them used by an attempt to put this Gaza in hands of Emirates or Mohammed Datlan, without delving into Datlan's political agenda. And I suggest for you to familiarize yourself with it and the challenging position for Israel. It's absolutely clear he will be dependent upon Hamas as well. And the considerations are quite similar for the Palestinian Authority and Datlan as well. So when it comes to the idea of the clans, which is a way to bypass Hamas through the local components, this idea failed completely, but particularly at this stage. When this is the state of affairs, there is no way behind it. 7 months after, there's still no any conditions that will create an alternative government for Hamas. Thirdly, the concessions that will be required on the border with the Egyptians. I assume that many in Washington are trying to build some kind of coordination between Israel's and American involvement in order to set and appease our mind when it comes to a contraband of arms. We were part of this already in January 2009. Big operation against Hamas, the CAST-led operation. Tzipi Livni, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel, signed such an agreement. And what came out of it? Nothing. So this agreement didn't stop the same war again and again. It didn't prevent it when one particle of contraband, when we were asked to sign the agreement opening the cross borders of Gaza Strip, intending to reinforce Abu Mazen towards the elections of those days in 2007, and nothing came out of it really. In Hamas, they celebrated this justice, and not even one particle of gunpowder was prevented from contrabanded into Gaza Strip. We need to create an actual effective prevention of Gaza weapons contraband. Without it, they will come back and hit us again, and will strike again. Commitment of Israel to lead towards the Palestinian state through negotiation, even if we'll ignore for a second the ideological dispute and various political considerations and value considerations, and we'll just focus on that from security perspective. The real answer to this requirement is this: impossible, it's unfeasible. Why is it unfeasible? Because Israel won't be able to compromise upon its positions about the borders and various security arrangements. Definitely not what happened in Gaza, and in light of an actual threat from the east. And I do not see a Palestinian leader that will be signing the agreement that will allow Israel to fulfill all of its requirements in those fields, and therefore this is improbable. It's unfeasible. Some will say, okay, so what's the problem of actually using the word the Saudis and Americans want to hear without actually doing the action? It seems to me that here, in this place, you understand very well. There are dynamics of declarations and commitments, and have certain dynamic, not disregard the power words. But not just because the probability, but feasibility. The different principles that are quite heavy, and we put them on scales as well. First of all, whether conversation about the Palestinian state after 7th of October do not reinforce Hamas. In fact, don't they understand the Palestinian public will see that as an achievement of Hamas, crowning Hamas as the entity that will bring the Palestinians this achievement, together with the high level of support they gain among the public, while at the background there's already the battle for them. Crown of Abu Mazen will pave the way of the terrorist organization to take over the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria as well. And nevertheless, such a step that will be attributed to Hamas, such a victory, something that reinforced the axis of evil. The most extreme Islamic movement will be reinforced instead of uniting around the way of moderation. The message it will send is different. Terrorism is worth your while. And what about the strength of the Palestinian Authority and its ability to actually comply with the expectations? Just a reminder, by the way, from 7th of October, Israeli military forces and agencies of security arrested more than 4,000 activists in Judea and Samaria, which is, in general, 18 arrests a day, I'm sorry. That's what we have to invest in order to allow the security in the areas where the Palestinian Authority is supposed to be in control without the crashes of Israel, whether the Palestinian Authority will be capable of actually complying on its own, whether those challenges of this particular time. And what about the position of the Palestinian Authority? Whether the Palestinian Authority that still commemorates with its educational system the battle awareness, paying terrorists, they never admonish the massacre of 7th of October. Shall we give them the reins? Shall we ignore all of that? Whether we expect it to take upon ourselves those chances that are similar to that. After the heavy price we paid, and we still continue paying, the political rank not just allowed, but must be sober and cautious and suspicious of the political future. Israel needs to trust itself mostly and to avoid entering processes that will be difficult or maybe even impossible to leave. Fifth point I wanted to bring up, but most important one, I think, is the issue of Iran. One can understand the positive impact, as far as we're concerned, that the local coalition may have against Iran, but whether it will be actually effective. Can you solve the nuclear problem? Whether we aspire towards pointless agreements and arrangements, the updates for recently that the United States resists the ratification of the Atomic Agency, a board of directors, reinforced that there are certain understandings between the parties that are being currently forged under the table. Those understandings will not solve the problems. Two additional issues connected to normalization with the Saudis, connected to the alliance with the United States and the nuclear that they require. I think when there is a unique status of Israel in the alliance with the United States and the qualitative advantage is maintained, we shouldn't be against it. We should actually support the alliance between the Saudis and the Americans. On the nuclear civil reactor, if the reports we receive are correct that the Saudis flex they're willing to enrich uranium on the American soil, then it might be an opening for certain progress. If those rumors are correct, because as Yoel said before, it's undermined my certainty of the statement, really. The defense alliance between the Israelis and Americans, where there is an attempt to actually obtain that as a part of the Saudi deal, is under a lot of question marks in our system. There are a lot of advantages when you enter such an alliance, but you can't ignore the risk and danger that it might position certain restrictions for Israel, an additional cost that we will pay, which I cannot currently undermine because of the lack of time. So shortly speaking, it depends on the characteristics of this treaty or the circumstances that will require to be fulfilled in such an alliance. To summarize my position, normalization with the Saudis, as I said, an important goal for Israel, but nothing to neglect, something we need to aspire towards, to make an effort to invest a lot into it, but as I said, not at any cost. And we need to reach normalization from power and point after rehabilitating our deterrence, removing the threat in Gaza, and out of a sober policy on the Palestinian matter. We need to continue a conversation with the United States to create the formula that will allow that and to guarantee an effective response to the issue of the Iranian nuclear. And if you will allow me, I would like to finish with a few words that are related to the bigger picture, and to say that, or to connect it to the things with which I opened. From this great darkness of 7th of October, tremendous forces that we have emerged, the spirit that showed that the nation of Israel is not tired and not fatigued. Our spirit is strong, we're well connected to our roots and the basic values, determined, vigorous, and not afraid of a lengthy path and journey, as we didn't lose our hope what we actually saw reinforces this hope very much.